So we're off. I always start by asking when and where someone was born.
Right. Actual date.
The actual date, if you like. Well, preferably, yes.
No, I was born on the 19th of December 1932 in the house that was my maternal grandparents' house in Stamford Hill in London. And my parents and my 3 elder sisters lived with my maternal grandparents in a rather big house that was in a terrace of 3 near the top of Stamford Hill.
So
in northeast
London. You obviously knew your maternal grandparents.
Not well, because I was evacuated in 1939 on the 1st of September, so living with them up to then, they were presences, and I can remember them, but I don't remember much about them. I have patches of memory. I do know, tangent, my grandmother, who was evidently, and as I found later, the boss of the place where my father worked. All my grandparents were immigrants, and she wore longish dresses down to nearly her ankles, and she was very short, although she didn't seem so short to me then. And she would, when she was in the right mood, she would, particularly for a little while after we were evacuated, gather up her skirt, because she had a purse hanging down between her skirt and her petticoat, and give you a little bit of money. So that stuck in my mind very well. And my grandfather was highly well, he was probably what one would call an intellectual, but he loved having friends from the synagogue who would come home. We had big dining room with a big table, and I can remember sort of peeping round the door with my sister and one of my sisters and seeing this room full of men, gabbling away at each other.
When you said both grandparents' generations were immigrants, where did they come from and what was their background?
Eastern Europe. Well, my mother's parents, there's a story, I don't know, I think it's a funny story, but my grandmother, who was quite a determined woman, went to the matchmaker, the shadchan, and said about this rather good-looking, slightly, I think one would call him rakish nowadays, man, and said, "That's the man I want to marry, and I've got the money for it." And I think people there had wondered how she got him, but she did. And they came over to England. My mother was born here in England in 1894.
Which part of Eastern Europe were they from?
Well, we're not quite clear where exactly it was. I think it was somewhere near Brody, and I've heard that mentioned. And also I've heard Galicia mentioned, so it became Romania and it became Russia, and it's all a bit muddled. The other grandparents were certainly from Poland.
And what were they doing? What was their occupation when they were there?
I don't know, but when they were here, as far as I know, my grandfather started a business, and the story is that he became bankrupt for £5, and his mother and his wife said, very triumphantly, "That's it, I run the business now, you're not allowed to." And so she did. And so all I remember of him was that he went regularly to the shul. I don't think he was particularly religious at all, but he liked talking to the men, and they liked coming to the house. And that tradition went on a bit because my mother was fairly shy. She had a younger brother, and there were two other children that one didn't survive long. But she and her younger brother used to go on holiday together, and she was quite happy with that. She didn't particularly want to leave home. She had won a scholarship to the Central Foundation School, which was a grammar school. But she left at 16, and then she went to Toynbee Hall to do evening classes and somewhere else, and she went to concerts with her brother, and they went on holiday together. And then her brother wanted to get married, and he got married, and she was never sort of bothered about it, as far as I know. But that brings in my father's parents, and they had come from they had come from Poland, and they'd come at the time of the pogroms from a ghetto, and he had been a carpenter joiner.
So what date was that?
I don't know the date they came. My father was 4 years younger than my mother, but they had come, and he'd come with 3 brothers, and they were all going to America, to North America, and one went on from there to Canada, one to Chicago, and one to Washington, D.C. But he didn't go because he had met, this is my grandfather, paternal grandfather, he'd met his wife-to-be, and she had either measles or meningitis or something when she was 2 or 3, and was completely deaf, and had never therefore been to school, never learnt language. And if she had, I don't know what language it was, if she'd had a few words. So she didn't speak. She had her own signs. She'd never been to a deaf school or learnt sign language. But they got married, and they couldn't go on because Ellis Island, they were going to go to America, to the US, and they were turning back anybody with a disability. And so they stayed in Liverpool, and the brothers got on the ship, and she stayed, and her sister married another immigrant and went to live in Shrewsbury, and he had walked from London to Shropshire with a tray of sort of ribbons and threads and that sort of thing over a period. And they'd set up, when he got there and they were married, they'd set up a shop, and she ran a shop selling women's clothes. And when my father, he'd left school at 12, and there were 5 younger children. His father had got a job when he arrived doing joinery on the big ships that were being built at Liverpool, the transatlantic and the cruise ships. They had some nice furniture built in. And he was sent off to earn his living, and he went to his aunt in Shrewsbury and worked in the shop, and the aunt was buying something from my maternal grandmother's factory. She'd got a factory making cheap clothes for traders like Marks and Spencer's, who weren't quite what they are now. And my grandmother and my great aunt made this match, and I don't think my mother was told much about it. I think my father knew what was going on. And there she was at 28, being married, that's very much on the shelf, being married to a man 4 years her junior, and nobody told him, I think, about ages, and she just did what she was told. Oh, they lasted, they had a long marriage. They married more than 50 years. I mean, that. So
it worked.
So it worked.
What were their characters, and how might that have influenced you, do you think?
My mother's nose was always in a book, and she brought us up reading all the time. She was quite widely read. She'd done quite well at school, and my father had a very basic education. He was quite good with his hands too. I mean, he was the only one, I think, in our family that could do a bit of do-it-yourself. Not that it was called that then. And he what was he like? I pause because I know in the way it happens that one of my sisters had a totally different view of both my parents from the view I had. She was number 2 of the 4 of us. I was number 4. Yes, so they had 4 children. I had four girls. And my father used to say, "What can I do with a house full of women?" That was long after. I've skipped forward and back.
You still haven't said anything about either of their characters.
Characters.
I mean, did you get on with them, or...?
Yes, I did. My mother was very anxious to avoid confrontation. She was fairly passive and didn't enjoy cooking, didn't enjoy sewing. She loved music, and she loved reading. And she was very good at reading to us, and reading and stimulating. And she'd learnt languages. She used to say that she did learn, but she didn't speak them, because she'd learnt them by buying the Bible in various languages, or getting hold of it, and working her way through them. And sort of, that was a long time ago. My father certainly...
Was she Jewish?
They were, they were all Jewish, all 4 of them. She had stopped going to the synagogue because she couldn't bear the way the women in the galleries, because you weren't allowed to sit with the men, just gossiped, and there was always chatter going on. And so she said, "I'm not going anymore," and if she wanted to do so, she could read the prayer book or the Bible. Okay,
but I won't press you much further on your father's character, but he was
he could be irritable, particularly with Joan.
So she didn't always get on with him, but was he encouraging when you went on to university?
He was terribly proud of the fact that we all got to university. Very, very proud of it.
So let's go back to your childhood. We usually have fragmentary memories of early events. Can you remember what your first fragmentary memory
before the war, it started when I was 6, so I can remember the house that we lived in, which was on, well, it was really 4 stories because there was a basement, and my grandparents had 2, I don't know how many, but there was a maid anyway, and I think there may have been a cook, and that was in the basement, and there was a very big room down there, which seemed to me enormous, and we sometimes had meals down there, and not with the grown-ups, but mostly I can remember before the war having a party downstairs with children from the kindergarten, and one of my eldest sister's friends coming to help with it. I was very close to my daughter Brenda, my sister Brenda, then getting mixed up, who was about the same size as me when I started remembering, because she'd been very fragile, the number 3 at birth, and they'd had problems of some medical sort with her, and she was well, my sisters are tiny compared with me. So, but not then. And yes, there was one of these hatch things, what do you call them, the service hatch, to the, so that food could come up. And I remember at one of the parties, when we were playing hide and seek all through the house, except in my grandparents' bedroom, Brenda hiding in the hatch, and they put it just a little bit lower so that you couldn't see her. Remember that.
Thought she was going to get whisked up to the top of the house and
oh no, it didn't go up any higher than the the front door was up a few stairs, and the basement was down a few, so it wasn't a long thing. I do remember sliding down the banisters. We used to do that. And I remember that being fascinated by the X-ray machine in one of the I think it was Clark's in Oxford Street.
See if your shoes were on properly.
Yes.
Oh, yes, I remember those now. What was your first school?
Well, there was the kindergarten, which was attached to the synagogue, which was in Stamford Hill. And then I suppose it was infants as well, because when I was 6 and we went to Welwyn Garden City, I was evacuated. All 3 of my sisters were at the Skinner's School on the top of Stamford Hill. Skinner's Company's School for Girls. They had, I think someone had reproached them for not having a girls' school years before. So they had this school which had an 8 to 11 and then a scholarship band for the grammar part of the grammar school from 11 to 18. So my 3 sisters were all there because it's, yes, the 8. Brenda would have been 8. So they were there, and the rule was that they could take younger siblings so as not to split families. And I do remember, that's one thing I do remember, having a gas mask and some sort of bag or package of sandwiches, and we had to get up early on the 1st of September before war was declared and go on the train from the local station all the way up to Welwyn Garden City, which seemed a big journey somehow. And the train was crowded with kids whom I didn't know, because most of them were older. But I had my sisters there, and we came out and sat in a hall, all the children, and people came in and read out names, and people kept disappearing. Children were taken off, and we were the very last, because they were trying to find somewhere where they could keep us all together. And in the end, I was taken with my eldest sister to look after me because I was little, and Brenda and Joan, the two middle ones, went together, and they'd found 2 houses in Barleycroft Road, and we were at number 30 and they were at number 36. So we were very close to each other. And I vividly remember going into this house with Pearl, and the first thing I saw, well, an old lady opened the door. She's probably younger than I am now. And there was a budgerigar in a cage, and I'd never seen one of those before. And it was sunny, and they had a room with French windows out, and there were 3 more sisters in the garden sitting in chairs, and a tortoise on the lawn, and I sat on the grass and sort of tried to play with the tortoise. And that's what. And they were lovely. They were 4 sisters, just as we were, and only one of them had been married. I know at least one had lost a fiancé in the war, and they were called Auntie Ruth and Auntie Amy and Auntie Addie and Auntie Winnie.
And they were kind
and they were lovely. They were really nice people. And I shared a room with my sister, and I kept thinking, well, is this war going to start? I do remember that. And then being woken up, well, not woken, but being sort of jerked into animation by the, yes, war's been broken out now. My other 2 sisters didn't do so well, but it worked out in the end. They went to a house where there was a daughter who was in between age, who was rather spoiled, and the family had obviously been told, these are East End kids you're getting, you better make sure they wash properly and that they haven't got fleas, and they'd put bunk beds into a room for them and said, oh, you've still got sandwiches, you can eat those, and sort of and I think they were more miserable. I felt very safe because Pearl was nearly, she was almost 16, and it was someone I felt safe with, and I know they had more difficulty, but after a few months he was moved to the north. His branch of civil service was moved, and my parents had never had a house because they'd lived with my grandparents. They bought the house, so we all moved in together. My father did a weekly commute, stayed in London. The factory was in Seven Kings, out at the east of London, and he could stay in London at Stamford Hill during the week and come home at weekends. So I didn't really, as so many of the other children there had, have a difficult time. my mother who was there, and so we coped. So we were there all through the war, and I really started this on school because I went to the local primary school, one of the local primary schools, which was quite near, and I'd go off down the road, and I suppose I was there for over a year, just over. And I do remember this, although I've been teased about it, so that's why it's in my memory. It was mixed, and I mixed school boys, and I had a fight with a boy on the way home one day because he said something and I took offence, and I pushed him or punched him or something and ran home. He lived very near in the same road. But then I went to the junior bit of Skinner's, which was evacuated. It was very funny in that time, the 8 to 11 part of the school had to have their classes in the Friends Meeting House, and the main part of the school shared the very new school building of the Welwyn Garden City Grammar School, which is now something called Stansfield or something like that, and is comprehensive, but it was very good. And so when Skinner's went back to London before the end of the war, I went into the second year of the grammar school, and it was a revelation because the teachers at Skinner's, who were all women, science was very badly taught, and the grammar school had started Latin a year earlier than we did at Skinner's, so I sort of had to work hard at that, but I got a much better education for about 2 or 3 years. Can't remember exactly, because science teaching was excellent, and Skinner's had been full of, rather elderly, well, they seemed elderly teachers who'd, teaching was the only thing that intelligent women could do, but they were a bit out of date. And then when we moved back to London, both my grandparents had died, and that's when we moved back, I think, after they'd died, a year after the end of the war. I could coast in science because, they weren't up to date, they weren't teaching, and
So you went back to the Skinners in London? I went
back to Skinners. We went back to the grandparents' house, which my parents had inherited.
Were there any teachers anywhere in your schooling who you remember as being inspiring or outstanding?
Well, I thought the teaching at the grammar school, the Welwyn Garden City School, were extremely good, and particularly the science teaching. And the other thing about it, which relates to politics, I suppose, was that it was a new school, it was forward-looking, and when it came to the 45 election, the headmaster's wife was the candidate for Welwyn Garden City. Labour. And I knew from home that something about, Labour cares more about everybody. And there were debates going on in the school, and there were people, putting forward the Conservative and other views, and but it just seemed right for me And that was, I suppose, I was about 12, 13, wait a minute. Yeah, whatever. So...
Well, that takes us conveniently onto politics, which, well, perhaps we can deal with it a bit later, actually. It's a bit early to start at 12. Were there any things at school that you were particularly excited by? Or?
And you did ask me about teachers, yes. The English teacher was very good. When I went back to Skinner's, and I got involved in acting.
Yes, I remember that.
And the history mistress was extremely good. And she'd come from somewhere else, and in fact she didn't stay at Skinner's. She left the year after I left and went on to City of London. And I think she was... Skinner's hadn't had a great tradition of sending women to university. Pearl went to LSE. Joan, who had a September birthday, had been started a year below she should have been, a year ahead.
Yeah.
She was a year younger than her contemporaries. And she was keen to read English. And she went and got into Newnham and started. Her birthday's September, and she was accepted at 17, which wasn't terribly good for her, I think, in retrospect. And then Brenda was also young, and she took a year. She persuaded our father that she needed languages, and she wanted to go to Switzerland. And she went to what was called a language school, but I think it was rather snobby. And I felt very estranged from her at that time. But she went to LSE and read sociology, and I wanted to go to drama school, and they all persuaded me that I could do. There was lots of acting, and the ones who'd been at LSE, well, Brenda was only 2 years ahead of me, said, you can do lots of acting, and get a degree because that'll be good for you. And I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I sort of entered for sociology because I didn't know what else to do. And my sister, who was very, very attractive, really pretty, and she used to bring people home. It was a thing in the family. You always had hospitality, everybody. And because our house had been round the corner from the Skinner's building, everybody from my year used to come in, and my mother would just say, would you like a cup of tea to people, and accept that, we all wanted to bring people home. And there was this basement room, which after the war had become, we got a table tennis down there, a table tennis table, and we were away from any of the others, so we used to use it. And Brenda used to bring home, quite a few of her friends were reading law, and I would get, I would talk to them, and they would sort of think, here's a nice baby sort of thing, 2 years too young for them. And I thought it sounded really interesting, so it was really a bit haphazard that I changed at the last minute before I started and said, can I change to law? And they said yes.
So you went to the LSE and studied law?
Yeah.
Right. Who were your teachers there?
Professor Hughes Parry, Stanley De Smith, whose widow is still a friend of mine living in Cambridge because he came here. Griffiths, company lawyer. The scheme was, because we didn't have separate degrees there, so we shared with King's and University College. So we went there for some lectures. You could choose between King's and UC. I started with UC in my first year, and the land law lecturer was so boring and so awful, and someone tipped me that if I went to King's, which was a bit nearer to walk anyway, there was someone who was much better, and I enjoyed that. I think it was Powell, his name, at University College. What I do remember from that time was one large man who used to get up, the only person who could get up and ask questions, and he later became Lord Chief Justice, Harry Wolff. So supervisions were within college, and the best supervisor I think I ever had. Tutorials, they were then, not Cambridge system. So you had about 10 in your class in a tutorial. And his name was just in my mind, and it's gone again.
Oh, well, when it comes back.
It's double-barrelled, and he was Austrian, and then he went, after I'd left, he went off to Oxford to a chair.
Oh well, we'll come back to him later.
Doesn't matter. But
he was very good.
He taught family law. He gave us he lectured in family law and labour law, both of which were more important to me than land law and company law and things like, and tort and contract, you know.
What else were you doing at the LSE? I mean, were you acting? Were you music?
I was acting. I was also, I had a period on the college council. I was in the Labour Club. And I like dancing.
Did you come across any? I mean, it was a time famous for its sociologists and for its political theorists.
Yeah, but a lot of my closest friends were sociologists, anthropologists. I knew Edmund Leach's name well, long before I...
Did you?
Yes.
Did you know Shapira as well? Isaac Shapira, he was...
I didn't know him, but I remember the name. And the other one who came, who was also in your department, I think.
From the LSE?
From the LSE, and they talked about him too. Eastern European.
I think about it, my memories. Not Maya Fortis, no.
No, I didn't know. I knew Maya from King's.
But Raymond Firth.
No, I can't think what he was. And I've missed out someone important in the law faculty, not that it matters.
Yeah, you enjoyed those years there?
Oh yes, yes.
Was it?
I didn't work as much as I should have done.
Was it a very political place? I mean, it was quite left-wing and...
Yes, it was. Oh, and yes, I remember Klaus Moser.
Ah, yes.
And
David Glass, he was a demographer there.
Yeah.
Raymond Firth, who was the...
Yes, that was the name. I mean, mostly because of friends talking about them and, you know, yes. Oh, and I did sport, yeah. What did I do?
What sport was that?
Well, one of the best things about LSE was that it had a squash court and shower rooms for women, so you could do it in the lunch hour. But I did play hockey and I did play netball as well, and a bit of tennis. but I preferred squash.
You've got obviously a good enough degree to go on. What does one do after a law degree?
Well, by the end, I decided to go to the bar, and so I did bar exams.
How does that work? Because is this matter of, do you go to a chambers, or do you get dinners, or what?
You eat dinners, and yes, for 3 years.
Seems a very strange system. I remember Tom Bingham explaining it to me. But I mean, how can eating a dinner with people prepare you for the great corpus of English law?
Well, it became more and more a university thing, and because you've been at university doing through the basic subjects. It would be different for someone from Cambridge, because they would have to choose their subjects to make sure they did them. But if you've done it for 3 years, you're bound to have done it. And you get exemption from part 1 of the bar exams. And then there were people called Gibson and Weldon, who became the bar school, and then widened out for solicitors as well. And you went to their courses to get through the subjects for bar finals. Now it's got rather better in that the dinners aren't so central, and there's far more emphasis on debates and moots inside your Inn of Court. And also young barristers and older ones are encouraged to take on tutees. And when I was at the bar, that had started for the first time, and I had overseas students, including one Chinese, at different times. I was at the bar for 8 years. And Orton Chirwa, who I remember with affection, and we kept correspondence for a time.
Were you at an Inn of Court?
Yes,
Which
Middle
one?
Temple.
Middle Temple? Oh, that's interesting. Some of my ancestors were in the Middle Temple.
Okay.
I'll ask you about it later, but they seem extraordinary places, very similar to, I suppose, Oxbridge colleges. But in what way were they different from Oxbridge colleges? I mean, you know, Cambridge. They had quadrangles, and they had meals, and they had...
Well, it was like a campus, yes. They had meals. I think the thing that impressed me most was after I'd qualified and was in chambers, that you went across from chambers to have lunch if you weren't in court or something, and everybody talked, and you usually sat at the same sort of place because you got to know the people there. And someone would start saying, I'm a middle-aged woman. This is a man speaking. I'm a middle-aged woman, and this has happened, and that's happened, and then something else has happened. You know, what do you think? And everybody would have a view, or it would be about the damages, or it would be about a commercial, it could be about anything, or a family case, or whatever. And you know, you felt you were being helped along. You didn't say too much if you were the youngest person there, but you could, and you could certainly ask a question. And the same was true in chambers. You could always go to someone else and ask. I mean, at the beginning, when you were doing all the rubbish work, at a time when I was there when hire purchase was first coming in, and there were things about cars, whether they were fit for the purpose, and you'd get this brief from someone who'd been sold a car, and I would go into people like Patrick Garland or my ex-pupil master, because I stayed. Yes, you had a year's pupillage before you really practiced. Although now I think the rules have changed somewhat. And I remember having explained to me what a crown, wheel and pinion was, and something else. I couldn't tell you what they are now, and I don't think I could have done a week after the case. You got into the habit of learning something technical for a particular purpose, and then blotting it out because you were onto something else. Yeah.
What was the main skill you were learning as in your barrister's training? Is it to stand up and present an argument orally and persuade a judge, or are there other more important skills?
Well, I think the thing to remember is that the witness or your client is more important than you. That's the thing that used to irritate me about the bar, or some of the people at the bar, who would sort of at parties stand in front of a fireplace and hold forth, you know.
Yes.
It was a time when not many women were at the bar, and I don't know what impelled me to the bar. Probably lack of knowledge. I mean, if I'd had Ken as a tutor, I wouldn't have landed up at the bar, I think, because he'd say it was too difficult. There are hardly any women there. I remember one of my first dinners at the bar. I didn't know where to sit, and you sit in a group of 4, and the older people are supposed to help you. And I sat where there were 2 what seemed to me quite ancient women who'd been among the first to be admitted, and that was fascinating. I don't think I saw them again afterwards. They'd come together to meet each other, but they were talking about it. And in their day, people really didn't practice. They got the qualification because they felt they should once it had been opened up. But I do remember reading a statistic in about the second year I was at the bar, saying there were, I think, 200 barristers 2,000 barristers in practice. Of about half of those were out of London, practicing at provincial bars. And of that 2,000, about 100 were women, and again it was about half in the provinces and half in London. And of the ones in London, the ones in the Chancery world were doing paperwork and not court work. And then there were some women who did law reporting. Poppy Jolovitz was a law reporter and a barrister, but I don't think she ever practiced in courts. And I was very lucky. I did 2 pupillages, one through a solicitor contact of my father's, and I went into those chambers for 6 months, and they were really too high-powered for someone new. I did see some things, but they were much more commercial chambers. And then you could change and do a second 6 months, and I got into a different set of chambers where there was quite a lot of family work, and there was ordinary county court work and ordinary criminal work, So I got a taste of everything, and they kept me on. So, and I was the only woman there.
What was the chambers called?
Well, it was 11 King's Bench Walk. Didn't have a separate name, but it was a joint set. There was an entrance, and there was Stuart Horner's chambers that I was in, and Heathcote Williams' chambers on the other side of the gap. But they each had a clerk, but the clerk's room was together, and there was a lot of toing and froing, so you got some work from both sides. And the Heathcote Williams chambers had a lot of people who did landlord and tenant work, so I got to do the small stuff of some of that, and rent acts and things like that were in the county court. So
what when you say I got to do some of that, tell me a sort of normal, typical day of working in a chambers. I mean, is it all paperwork, or do you...
No, well, it's a mixture. And when you're at the beginning, you very often get the cases, you get all your cases from solicitors. And you did then. And I mean, there were some solicitors who solicitors could do a certain amount of work in the county court themselves, if it wasn't open court and magistrates' court work. They could do, but they often were much too busy to do it, or couldn't do it at the last minute because something came up, because they had clients at their door, the people who were litigating and or being prosecuted, whereas we only had solicitors. And so at the last minute, I can't be bothered to go down to court on this and be out of the office. Send it down to one of those youngsters at the bar and they can do it. And one particular firm in Grays on the near Southend used to send me a lot of work, including their rubbish work, because I'd be down there anyway, and things
rubbish,
like judgment
rubbish
summonses.
Work. What is rubbish work?
Well, you're not really doing anything except saying this is what the case is about, and the judge is saying yes, you can have the order that you asked for because nobody's appearing against you.
Right.
So it really is, sort of not stretching you at all.
Yeah. So you were sent a lot of this sort of stuff, and
yes, and you got sent the magistrates' court family work, which was different in those days than there's much less of it now, but just separations or maintenance unpaid. And I used to go to Cambridge House, which was one of these poor man's lawyer places, and if they had anything to go in court, you got a brief marked £2 4 and 6pence. The tradition was still guineas then, so you got the 2 guineas and half a crown for the clerk. And that was the same with undefended divorces, which solicitors couldn't do themselves, even though they were undefended, because there was no right of audience before a judge sitting in open court with his wig on.
Really? That's what... Only barristers can go into open court where the judge is wearing a wig, is that?
Well, not now. I mean, solicitors got right of audience very happily for me. They got right of audience when the law, and about the same time as the law changed on divorce. So it came to the county court. Before that it was high court. Solicitors couldn't appear in the high court. They could appear in the county court. They could appear in the county court in open court, but they couldn't appear in the high court. in open court because, well, but they were dressed differently. So, and there was a bit of a thing. I mean, judges were only barristers jumped up the step.
Tell me about. I mean, probably a long time ago, but what was your most interesting case at this time?
At that time, my interesting cases were so overshadowed by the ones I did when I was a solicitor.
Oh, right. Well, you can leave it if you like, but which ones do you enjoy most at that time?
Well, something with a bit of real argument. I wasn't all that keen on. I did go on the assizes just because you could pick up cases, either doc briefs or assigned prosecutions. I didn't particularly like criminal law because although every case is different on its facts, there's not much law involved on the whole. And you're going to be as good as or bad as your witnesses, provided you know the rules of evidence and you don't ask the wrong sort of questions. I mean, there are all sorts of things that can go wrong, like asking a leading question when you don't know the answer, and asking a leading question, asking a question in cross-examination and getting the answer you don't expect, which can undermine your case completely. So it didn't. I didn't really go for that. I suppose it's.
These were cases with criminal cases, certainly with juries.
Yes.
And I mean, there's been a lot of discussion recently about the jury system and its strengths and weaknesses. What were your experiences of jury work?
I think on the whole they got it right. I mean, I don't remember any criminal case. Oh, I do remember a magistrate's court case. That was probably later too. So I'll leave that to my change of.
But on the whole, it was positive, was it, of criminal cases?
Sorry? Yeah, I don't. I think having more people, having a jury is a good thing. Yes, I do. You know, 3 judges to 1 judge can make a mistake and be prejudiced. With a range of people, it's possible that someone will say, no, I disagree. I suppose unanimous verdicts have gone some of the time. I mean, some judges wouldn't allow it on a particular case, I think, but it was unanimous verdicts then.
What qualities do you think are most important in a good barrister?
Well, clarity. Says she not being very clear in what she's thinking, because I'm trying to think round the subject. But fluency to some extent, not necessarily, because you have got time to think. But preparation is tremendously important, particularly if you're arguing law. Different things, trying to get evidence out of witnesses. You're tremendously good at it. I'm sure you'd know exactly what to do yourself, because but you have to be able to guide people without suggesting the answer. So you've got to be clear that you're doing open questions and not leading questions. But also working out beforehand what the issues are, what the important points are in evidence, what you want to stress and how you want to stress it. Having some sort of plan, but being flexible enough to change it. And you certainly can't plan all your cross-examination of witnesses, because you've got to be open to adapt to their answer and see whether you should press further or whether you should leave it at that, or whether you're never going to get the answer you want, and if you press you're going to get them more and more sure that they should stick to what they've said and not and not say, well, perhaps I'm wrong, or you don't get that reaction. So
humour, is humour important or not?
I think it's possibly quite even more important if you're in a criminal case and you want to captivate the jury. On the whole, judges prefer to make their funny remarks themselves. Preparation, early on, when we did undefended divorces and the law was quite different, the judge who sat in the High Court, he was a county court judge, they all sat as special commissioners in the High Court, used to love teasing young barristers with white wigs, and therefore would say, oh, what about section 34, or have you considered the law in such and such a case? And they were both well-known traps, and he's written funny books about it. The name's gone. Can you stop?
How did you come to Cambridge? I mean, was that before you met Ken or after you met Ken?
Oh no, after, because of Ken. I only came when I was married.
How did you meet Ken?
I met him at a New Year's Eve party. A friend of mine was sharing a flat. This was after. Yes, I think I was in my pupillage. I'd qualified and was in my pupillage. And a friend from university had an old school friend who was at Newnham, and they were having a New Year's Eve party, and she'd said, bring people who are around. Ken, at that time of the year, wasn't going home to South Africa, and he was friendly with one of the others, and he was brought along, and that's when I first met him. And because my first pupil master had been from Port Elizabeth, where he'd grown up, we talked a bit, and he was still eating dinners at the bar, and he said, perhaps we'll meet for a coffee sometime if you're dining at the same time. And I said, okay, well, let me know, and thought not much about it. And he wasn't a dancer, and there was some jiggling around, so I danced, so I didn't take all that much notice, except thought he was a nice young man.
Was he at King's then, or not?
Yes. He was doing an affiliated degree. He'd got a degree from Rhodes first, so he was in his tripos year, doing part 2. And we did meet up after our meal, because he was in Inner Temple and I was in Middle Temple. and we went for a cup of coffee, and then we went home to our respective homes. But then he did phone up sometime later and ask me. We went to a film together, and then I visited him in Cambridge, and then, you know, it's sort of, that was 5 years till we got married.
So gradual, careful.
It was, yes, quite gradual. Now, I did go on a holiday with him and his friend Rodney, who was a lawyer as well. And then I went to South Africa once, and then we had a year when he was doing his fellowship dissertation, and we didn't see each other because he wanted to concentrate on it. And then when he'd finished it, we went out together, and then we got married.
He got a fellowship on the fellowship dissertation, did he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Noel had earmarked him for. They'd been waiting for a lawyer to.
Noel Annan, yeah.
Yeah. Noel Annan.
Give me a little pen portrait of Ken. Of course, I knew him towards the end of his life a little bit. He seemed a very, very charming and warm sort of person, quite driven, hard-working.
Perfectionist. Yes, lovely. Very warm, very highly intelligent. So many things. Yes. I'll have to
Too many things.
Too many things. Yes.
He was obviously very public spirited. I mean, he supported a lot of people.
Yes, and wonderful at his interest in other people. Full of questions. I think that was one of the first things. One of the things I noticed early on. That he always wanted to know more about people, about what they were doing, about how they were. And very empathetic about it, but also quite rigorous in, not being judgmental and seeing. I think one gets trained to that as a lawyer too, that there is bound to be another side to any story. So you don't make judgments quickly.
Did he he taught law. Did he practice any law?
He did a pupillage. And it was always a bit of a joke that during his pupillage, and he got a highly academic one in a way, but got a case in the Privy Council that was, got a mention in the law reports long before I did. And mine wasn't a personal mention in the law reports. I had a reported case or two, but not a. I think coming back to my side, my father was terribly excited when somebody had pointed out that some nondescript little criminal law case of mine had a 3-inch report in the News of the World, of all places. I thought that was best forgotten. I did get a case in the law reports while I was still at the bar, and that was a rather silly one.
When you came to Cambridge, did you actually come to this house, or
no? We got the first year we had Ken's colleague who was made a fellow at the same time as he was, Jim Turner, and they'd got a flat in Croft Gardens, and were going off to California for a year. He'd got something there. And we moved in. They'd furnished it, and we moved in for a year. And then St Edward's Passage became free. It had been...
Which number? 17?
17B, the top one. And that was absolutely marvellous. Hal and Heather had moved to a house. They were the last people, and before them the Annans had it. And it had this wonderful roof garden where you could go over the steps and see out onto the chapel roof. I've probably told you this
I've
before.
seen the photo, yes, that you took sitting, and you had plants in sort of boxes there, didn't you?
And chairs, and found a few more photos of that. I'll try and get together.
Who was in the flat below you, 17B?
It was still Lydia Lopakova's.
Was it?
The Kane's flat. And then halfway through, when she gave it up, just before she died, Tony Tanner and Marcia had it. Tony and Marcia Tanner. Until they moved into the thing. But we were there from 1960. We married in 61. We were there 62 to 68, and that's when we moved here to this house.
And I moved into that flat in 1971.
Oh, right.
17B.
So someone was between us.
Yes, someone was between. I mean, you obviously overlapped with a lot of King's people, both there and later and elsewhere. Were there any particular friends you had in the college, or people you knew well?
Well, the Browns came to live next door to us.
Dan Brown. And
the other side of this wall. And we'd bought it from the Williamsons. The Browns, I'm seeing her this evening.
Are you? Margaret.
Margaret.
Give her my love.
Yes, I will. Who else? Well, I mean, you know, people
Bernard
who are
Williams,
friends.
I suppose.
Yes, me, Bernard, and
Pat.
but also Shirley.
Did you?
Yeah, we went to dinner there because she was very interested in the was it in the Garden House case or the Dutschke case? One of them. She'd asked to get some background to it. So yes. Who else? I mean, Ken helped ever so many people, so we did see quite a lot of different people.
You obviously knew all the old people. Peter Avery.
Peter Avery. I was just thinking of the Argentinian couple, the Levs.
Yes.
Arié and the names come back. Arié. I remember him quite well.
And Win Godley and all these people.
Yes.
I mean, how did you... colleges are often accused of being rather neglectful of wives of fellows. Did you find that with King's, or...?
No. Well, yes and no. I mean, for the first 3 years when I was still working as barrister in London or elsewhere, wherever, it was tremendously useful that I sort of spent probably 2 or 3 nights away, never more than that. But Ken could dine in King's, and you know, I didn't need to worry that I was neglecting him or anything. And then going in to dine was when they were able to take guests in who were wives. was a very mixed business, and I wasn't altogether sure I wanted to, unless it was, well, the beginning, the occasions were worse than anything, because, you know, Founders' Day, having, I only did it once, you were allocated to one of the wives who would give a dinner party for wives, and then all the dinner parties would congregate, and you had to go into the gallery and have dessert and wine. And you could listen to the speeches, which you couldn't really hear, and you could see the tops of the heads of your various partners.
Yes, I heard about these strange things.
Very strange.
John Saltmarsh was organising them, I seem to remember.
One was enough. I mean, you know, it just seemed so false. I'm sure it was a very nice dinner, but I do remember she had her own asparagus beds, so that was something I hadn't come across before.
Donald Parry was probably...
Donald Parry was a great friend. And the Ravens, of course, John Raven and Faith.
But later you found it a little more welcoming, or?
Yes. And, you know, there were quite a few people like Naomi, what's her name? Oh, I can't think of names, I'm sorry. But there were people who've moved on and moved away, and
more friendly.
yeah. But there was also the thing that if you went in on an ordinary night, or a wine night, for example, you could be sitting next to someone who was fascinating, and it was really interesting to be there, and you could find out a lot and learn a lot. Or else you could be sitting next to somebody who'd been working with one of their research students, and they'd come down and dinner was just a continuation of conversation, and they hardly noticed you were there. And the person on the other side of you, who was being perfectly charming, no doubt, also had to speak on both sides. So, and talking across those tables is pretty impossible.
Yeah.
So it was a mixed business, and so I've always felt a bit reluctant. I mean, I have dining rights as a member of High Table, but I wouldn't go in unless I knew someone who was going. Because I'd feel intruding.
Well, we must go in together sometime.
That would be nice.
When you came here, you changed from being a barrister to a solicitor, did you?
Changed before I got here, because when we decided, after we were married in '61, and I suppose we made a decision sometime in '63 that we, because of my age particularly, people didn't wait so long as they do now. We wanted to start a family, and so we talked about it a lot and decided there was no local bar in Cambridge. There was no way we could start a family if I was working in London, even with taking time off, which didn't at that time bode well at the bar. And the obvious thing was to do a changeover, which meant that I'd have to I'd get exemption for certain subjects, but I'd have to do bar finals. I didn't have to do part one. And because I'd been at the bar more than 5 years, it would be 8 years, there was a rule that you didn't have to do solicitor's training, you didn't have articles. So it just meant you did the exams and then you were a solicitor. And you had to be debarred. So I remember being debarred at my own request in and doing my last case in the High Court in late July, and someone sort of raising an eyebrow and saying, yes, we've heard something, Miss Sands, as I appeared before him. And then Judy was born in September, and during the time between, I'd been mugging up for bar exams, and at that time, it may still be true, as long as you did 3 papers and got through them all first time, you could then add the others one by one. So I took 3 that I'd been practicing in: family law, sale of goods and contract or something. I can't remember now. I know family was one of them, and that was easy. I got through those 3, and then I just, while I was at home, I added the others one by one, just doing a bit of home study and looking after the children. And I, at some time in that period, I started doing some supervision for some of the colleges in family law, and Derry Irvin gave me his supervision notes, and he was going to LSE, so it seemed very apposite. And so I had students. I did about 8 hours a week, seeing people once a fortnight in 2s and 3s. While we were in St Edward's Passage, that was fine, because it started there, and I went on when we came here for a bit longer, until they did come out here, I think, for a year. Anyway, and then I looked for a part-time job, and that was very difficult. The first people I asked, who were Hewitsons they are now, but they were 3 names. Wild Hewitson Shaw, that's it. I had a very nice interview with very nice people, and they had the only other left-wing lawyer in Cambridge, as far as I knew, and I got to know him very well, or I'd known him by then. But the senior partner said, absolutely no, we don't want a woman solicitor, and we don't want to give up a room for someone who's part-time. The next one said, can't afford to give, very nice man, can't afford to keep a room for you or let you have a room if you're working part-time. And then I found Tony Hawley, who I think had been to some of Gen's summer lectures. He'd been at Clare, and he'd just taken over a moribund practice called Miller and S.J. and something else Miller, that had had a family connection with a firm in London, and he was willing to take me on as a tame barrister to do the court work. And as I said before, the divorce came to the county court, so solicitors were able to undertake divorces in court, and they were in open court, and I knew how to do them. They were bread and butter things. You could do half a dozen, 10 in a day if you in the High Court if you were there. I mean, if you got them from, you were instructed by people. Well, I never had that many here, but the funny thing was that one of the older solicitors in one of the old firms in town, who was on the council of the Law Society, thought, well, I shall go and do it. And of course he'd never sat behind counsel, he didn't know how to do it. He started off by asking, I wasn't there, I didn't hear this, I've only heard the story, but he asked leading questions when he shouldn't have done. The judge got irritated, he got things in the wrong order. And all the other solicitors sitting behind counsel listening got terrified and wouldn't do it. And then I came along. I knew the judge because he used to be the judge in Southend and Grays. I knew, and he was also someone who'd seen me in the Bar Theatrical Society. He knew I'd been a member of the club. So we sailed through, and I think that's why I started getting a reputation in Cambridge, that I did them and other people didn't, and they didn't have to go through two people, a solicitor and a barrister. They could do them with me. So it was all serendipity and not
planned. Is that when you joined Miller's? I mean,
yes.
Yeah. And then you later became a partner, and
yes, later became a partner and then senior partner when in the end.
Interesting. You mentioned the famous Garden House affair.
Yeah.
Can you tell us something about that? Because it was a landmark in Cambridge history.
Yes. In fact, we were on sabbatical when it actually happened. We heard about it in the paper and got back soon after. I found that I had 9 people waiting. No, it was more than 9. King's people mostly, almost all King's people.
What happened? Just people won't know what happened.
Of course. It was the time of the Greek colonels. There'd also been this film shown in Cambridge and elsewhere about the run-up to the takeover by the colonels and the awful things that had happened because communists were being really harried and it was a coup. And the Greek government were very keen to start up their tourist industry again after all this chaos that had been going on. And they organised through the tourist board Greek Week in Cambridge. And one of the travel companies was involved with this and set up a big dinner at the Garden House where people paid a lot, but there was going to be a lot of stuff about Greece and how wonderful the holidays were and come and travel. And a lot of people in the university from the top downwards or the bottom upwards were horrified at this and decided to make a peaceful demonstration. And there was a committee and there were people who were known to be left-wingers. And there was this demonstration on the lawns outside the Garden House, which was invaded by a few anarchists and a few kids and people who had heard that there was going to be fun at the Garden House. And it got totally out of hand with people throwing stones and smashing windows and tables being tipped and an awful mess. The proctors, the proctor and the bulldogs or whatever they were called, were there. And they gave, one of the things that inflamed it even more was they gave names to the police of the people they knew were, well to the left. And who'd been making, not violence. It was meant to be violent. A lot of people who were there were really just expressing their disapproval of a dinner in Cambridge for that purpose. And there were prosecutions. I think there were something like 23 altogether, and there were 3 firms of solicitors. The one I spoke about, the man from Wild Hewitson and Shaw, had gone off in his own, and Peter Saw, a very nice man, who was as far as I knew, the only other Labour Party solicitor in town, and a London solicitor, Emil, Barry Emil, represented 3. I had the most, for some reason, because a lot of them happened to be kings. Or, well, there were some kings and some others. And they went to the magistrates' court first for committal, and we had no case to answer for some of them, including one against whom nobody had said anything, and nobody had seen him there. He was there, but nobody had noticed him doing anything other than stand there. And I found out afterwards that what had happened was that they'd seen somebody on the roof, and someone had called out, "Oh, that's young so-and-so." And it was his younger brother, who was only about 15, had, been with a few lads joining in the fun. And they'd heard the name and thought it was the older brother, because they didn't know about the younger brother. And he was pulled in. I mean, extraordinary. The proctors got a lot of... you weren't around then, were you?
What date was it?
1970.
Yes, it was the year before I came.
Anyway, it so we got some of them out, but then it went to the assizes, and they wouldn't have it in Cambridge, so they had it in Hertford. And the judge who was appointed to sit was lived in a house called Truncheon's, was known to be very anti students and people rioting. Well, anybody doesn't want riots, but he was very severe. The first bit of the name's gone. It's something Stevenson.
I
know it well.
Not Melford Stevenson.
Melford, thank you. Melford Stevenson.
Yeah.
Dreadful that I couldn't get that. Sorry. And he directed the jury. I mean, a lot of people from here came down to Hertford and listened, and I was there all the time. We had people like a chap who became... We had Bob Rowthorne, of course. We had... names are going to escape me again. Man who became president of Queen's was one of my witnesses. And he launched out at senior members as well. The evil influence of dons, or some words. I've got the thing. It was awful. And we had to go to appeal, and we got. I used to go down and visit my King's people in Wormwood Scrubs, taking them cigarettes.
What was the maximum sentence they got?
Rod Caird, who wasn't one of mine, got 3 years, I think.
Seems out of all proportion.
Out of all proportion. He had been, in the end, the only people who were convicted had something else other than being there. Rod Caird, I think, was holding a stick. No, maybe that was our chap, Williams, but he got a year in youth detention, whatever it was then called. And there was one other, Brian Williams, who'd had a sentence, had a mole fuse in his pocket, which he said someone had given him, and he just put it in his pocket because he didn't know what to do with it. Thing that big, green, bit thicker than a cigarette. And he came out on appeal, and 2 of them had deportation orders. He was South African, and the other one was South American, Argentinian, I think. Medical student, Badia, perhaps. Anyway, it got into the law reports and gave birth to the law surgery, which we ran in Cambridge for many years. With people like Bob Heppel, and Ken was, and myself and David Pearl. Lawyers, the lawyers around the place.
So something good came out of it.
Something good came out of it.
How depressing. Well, we're just getting towards the end of the tape, and
I've talked too long. I wanted to tell you about Rudi Dutschke. That's the only other thing.
Yes, tell me about Rudi Dutschke.
Well, Rudi Dutschke was the chap in Berlin who was shot in the head and came here for medical treatment.
He was supposed to be a left-wing.
Oh, he was.
He wasn't a member of the Baader Meinhof or anything. But
no.
No.
That came after.
But he was quite left-wing.
No, he. It was another demonstration, and there were people like they set up this special tribunal. The change from Maudling, who'd let him in for medical treatment, and then MacLeod, who said, well, that's finished. Pippard at Clare Hall had offered him to do a PhD here, and he'd applied to do that, and they didn't. That was something different from what he'd been admitted for, so they wanted to turn him out. Special tribunal. Only time it sat, the case presented by the Attorney General, Peter Rawlinson, and we had Michael Foote, all sorts of witnesses about it, but he got thrown out.
Did he? Because he was somehow associated with King's, I think, as well at some point.
Bob Young was very much involved. It was Bob Young who brought him to me, I think.
So he was sent back to Germany?
No, he couldn't go back to Germany. He had a bullet in his head. I mean, there's...
So what happened?
Denmark took him on, and he went to Aarhus. And he died a few years later. He had a wife and children here. They were at Clare Hall, with residents.
And were you representing him? Or?
Yeah. And I used the same team as I'd used in the Garden House.
What was he like?
It was shortly after.
As a person?
He seemed extremely nice, and his wife was nice. I mean, politically, he couldn't totally disengage, and people did come to visit him, but there were all sorts of things about how they were collecting evidence. And there was a day, and this was unprecedented, when not only we were not allowed to hear the evidence, but nor was counsel, nor were the solicitors, nor was he. So we never knew what was said against him.
Secret trials, and that was the beginning.
That was the beginning. And I wonder that nobody mentioned it since, because recently they've been talking about how wrong it is, or how right it is to exclude.
Yes, exactly. This was the precedent. Is there anything else that you would really like to have been asked about, or your children, or
children have been a joy.
you mentioned them and having them, and
Yeah.
what are they doing?
One's working at one of the village colleges, not actually teaching, though she does. She trained as a journalist, and her scope has been rather limited since, because of living in Cambridge. So she did work for the Cambridge News for many years, and the other's doctor, bringing up a couple of children, and doing part-time GP, part-time a bit of university teaching.
Oh well, I think on a nice family note we'll end there. Thank you very much indeed, Rosemary.